So you want to change your body, but you have no idea whether you should be cutting, bulking, or doing that recomp thing that everyone online is obsessed with. But the truth is, most people shouldn't be doing any of those yet. So before you touch your diet, this video is going to show you exactly what you need to be focusing on first. And then, once that's in place, deciding exactly what phase you should be in, using actual science so you can see real, tangible progress. Before we start throwing ourselves into a cut or a bulk, we first need to understand exactly how muscle is built, because that's usually where most people go wrong. Muscle growth or hypertrophy is simply the increase in size of our muscle fibers. Now, most people assume that they need to eat more and lift weights in order to see this growth, which is why most people hop straight into an extreme bulk the day they start the gym. Usually, if you're anything like me, this will look like eating as much as humanly possible in hopes of growing. And don't get me wrong, eating more can help, especially for beginners, but it can turn into the wrong decision very quickly. Based on current research, the main driver of muscle growth is mechanical tension. When a muscle experiences enough mechanical tension, it triggers cellular signaling pathways that increase muscle protein synthesis. Over time, if your rate of muscle protein synthesis exceeds muscle protein breakdown, you'll build muscle. But is a calorie surplus required to fuel this process? A 2019 review by Slater and Phillips looked directly at this question, whether an energy surplus is required for muscle growth, and they found that it isn't. Muscle can still be built in a calorie balance, and even in some cases a calorie deficit. Like I mentioned before, when you resistance train, you create a powerful anabolic signal, and as long as you're eating enough protein and recovering properly, the body can utilize its already stored energy, such as fat, to support muscle protein synthesis. This is especially true for newer lifters, those returning to training, or those with higher body fat levels. They already have plenty of stored energy available to drive that growth process without having to eat in a direct surplus. So while eating more can make the process easier for some, it's not a requirement and honestly isn't the best decision for a lot of us. Instead, before you even think about cutting, bulking, or recomping, you need to make sure you're nailing the basic principles of muscle growth. Utilizing exercises that load the target muscle, taking each exercise a few reps shy of failure within each session, aiming to increase the weight or reps on an exercise on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, resting and sleeping enough outside of the gym, eating at least 0.8 grams of protein per pound of your body weight on a daily basis, and doing this consistently for months at a time. If you can't nail these basic variables, don't even try and touch your diet, because it's these basics that's going to drive real growth. Now, this inevitably does bring up the question, when does a calorie surplus or a deficit actually make sense? First, let's start with our surplus. There are two main scenarios where going into a bulk would make the most sense. First, you're a newbie. New lifters, or lifters who haven't been in the gym in a long time, have a lot more wiggle room to build muscle simply because they're either detrained or they've never done it before. If a new lifter with little to no muscle mass was to start eating over maintenance, in some cases up to even 2,000 calories above their maintenance, they can convert most of that extra energy into lean body mass because their body is growing muscle at a faster rate. However, those of us who are more trained don't have that luxury. Our bodies are much more efficient and muscle happens at a much slower pace, so even if we did eat in these extreme calorie surpluses, it doesn't necessarily mean that we build muscle faster, but we would put on more fat. Second, you're ultra lean. People who are very lean, typically following a bodybuilding prep or an extreme cut, may also benefit from a period of eating in a calorie surplus. At extremely low levels of body fat, energy availability drops below levels that are required for healthy hormone function, metabolism, and to have your recovery functioning properly. This is why a slight surplus can help bring these people back to normal functioning and get back on track with building muscle as efficiently as possible. Outside of these main scenarios, someone who is more advanced can also benefit from a surplus. They just need to be more mindful on the size of that surplus in order to maximize muscle gain while minimizing excess fat gain. This, of course, brings us to our next question. How big should our surplus be? It's hard to give a recommendation here that'll apply to everyone because your surplus amount will differ from person to person. And to optimize muscle gain, it should also be scaled to your gym performance. But instead of shooting in the dark, thankfully for us, research does provide some soft guidelines for us to follow. They also suggest that surpluses should be conservative and scaled to gym performance, ranging anywhere between 5 to 20% over your maintenance calories. Closer to 5% if you're more advanced, and closer to 20% if you're newer to lifting or detrained. And once you do get your surplus number, it's really important for you to keep an eye on either the scale or your body composition, as well as how you're responding in the gym to fine-tune your surplus number. If you notice you're gaining mostly fat, then you can scale back on your calorie surplus just a touch. If you notice that you aren't changing at all and your progress in the gym is still flat, despite hitting all your basic muscle building variables, then you can increase your surplus just a little bit and track how your body responds. Don't try and rush this process and try and artificially inflate the scale by increasing your intake. Trust me, doing it that way only makes it much harder to diet the fat off later on. Speaking of diets, it's time to move on to our next section, the cut. There are only really a few situations where a calorie deficit would make sense. First, when you're carrying more body fat than feels comfortable or than is healthy for your frame. As a rough guide, that's typically when you're sitting above 20 to 25% for men and 30 to 35% for women. But this does vary from individual to individual. Second, you want to enter into a bulk, but you want to tidy up the amount of body fat you're currently carrying before you do so. That way, you'd have more room to grow before you'd need to taper back. So, how big should your deficit be? Well, ideally, we want to keep building muscle for as long as possible within our deficit, or at least maintain the muscle we already have. That means our deficit really shouldn't be that steep. Research shows that smaller, more conservative deficits are much better for building lean mass or maintaining lean mass, with deficits going beyond 500 calories per day, blunting muscle growth. So for most people, the sweet spot is likely around a 10 to 20% calorie deficit from their maintenance, which roughly works out to around 300 to 500 calories less each day, or losing around 0.5 to 1% of your body weight each week. Just like in our surplus phase, you also want to make sure you're keeping an eye on your body composition and your gym performance here. If the scale's dropping too fast and you're feeling flat, miserable, and weak in the gym, then pull back on your calorie deficit a bit. If nothing's changing after a few weeks and you're hitting all your variables, shave off an additional 100 to 200 calories and then reassess. The goal here isn't to lose weight as fast as possible, it's to keep your strength and training performance as high as possible as we lean out. I really hope today's video helped show you guys how important your training really is when you want to transform your physique, and how we can also use cutting or bulking as a tool to help in that transformation process. Don't forget to let me know down below if it did, and like and subscribe while you're down there to join us Pookies. Hopefully I will catch you guys in my next one.